I don't usually have kind things to say about the Vanguard. See, and I thought that Peter, in his 20-page introduction, was simply going to take out his clippings over the last 5 years. But, in fact, I want to thank the Vanguard for putting this meeting on tonight. They've chosen a topic, and I think the fact that we have this many people here tonight indicates that it's a topic of real interest, and it's a topic that, in fact, does not get the kind of discussion that it should have. Obviously, the media itself does not often spend a whole lot of time analyzing the media. So it's good that we're having this meeting, and also, from my point of view, it's a privilege. It really is to be up here with two people who have played a significant role in modern American history, Dave Dellinger and Abby Hoffman. Let me touch on the media from a number of points of view. Let me just go over some facts. And again, it's hard being third because Abby and David have touched on a lot of them already. The first point to understand is if you think that the function of Channel 3 or the Burlington Free Press is to educate you about the world in which you're living, it's not. It really is not. And that's the nature of private media in general. The function of private media is to make money for the people who own the media. It is a business. When you go to McDonald's, you don't go there and say, Jesus, I didn't get the whole story about what's going on in Nicaragua. You got a hamburger. And when you watch television, you also should not be terribly disappointed that you have not learned about what's going on in the world in which you're living. That is not the function of television. In general, not in general, but as is the fact, the mass media in this country is owned by very, very wealthy people. Both David and Abby mentioned that we live in a country where a tiny handful of people own and control our country, and you can be damn sure that when you own and control this country, you own and control the media. Now we do have a free media, it's a free society, and for a mere $6 or $7 billion, anybody in this room could probably buy CBS tomorrow. We might want to pass the hat. After putting the money into my campaign, what we have left over, we might want to buy NBC. You know, And what's going on throughout our economy, as you know, is that there is a growth in conglomerate takeovers, and one corporation is taking over another corporation, and that trend is progressing very, very rapidly in the mass media. And Abby mentioned a very excellent book that I hope some of you read. It's by Ben Bagdikian, and it's called The Media Monopoly. And what he talks about, among other things, is the growth of corporate control over the media, and the Gannett Press, for example, is one phenomenon of that. There was a time in this country, for better or worse, where in the largest cities in the country you used to have a lot of newspapers. Very often they weren't particularly good, but they were in competition with each other. Now what's happening all over this country is you're seeing fewer and fewer papers, and the papers are being bought up by large chains such as Gannett. Gannett now owns something like 92 newspapers, daily newspapers, plus USA Today, plus they have money in cable and other media areas. According to some of these Wall Street takeover experts, there is an estimate that by the mid-1990s, if present trends continue, there will be perhaps throughout the world, 10 international communications corporations. 10. And the estimate is that perhaps in 5 years there will be 6 major communications corporations in America who will not only control the newspapers, but also the magazines, also the book publishing firms, also television, also radio. That is, frankly, very, very frightening. So I think the first point that I want to make, which is not a different point than Abby and David made, is that while all of us, I expect, I certainly am not sympathetic to government control over the media, I think not to understand that corporate control over the media is equally dangerous, and that's very clearly the trend to which we're moving today. Furthermore, if we understand that the function of the media is not to inform, is not to educate, but is essentially to make money for the people who own it, then we look at the nature of the media. And what you're seeing now, and Abby correctly went through some of the incredible things that are going on in this country. Huge numbers of our brothers and sisters in this country can no longer read. You know, when you sit there and as a politician you think about how do you communicate with the people, significant numbers of our people cannot read. No one is terribly worried about that. In fact, that's to the advantage, I suspect, of the people who own this country. Television is a better way to manipulate people's minds than through books, and it's good to have illiteracy, and that's probably why we have it. But what's going on now is the media is giving up to a large degree any pretense at serious journalism, and you're moving into the trend of the USA Today. Simple and stupid and color pictures. And the television, we will be on tonight, if they give us a great deal of time, what will we have? 30 seconds or 60 seconds to analyze the works that we have. And we have no doubt that our reporter here will be able to put it all together in 35 seconds, condensing what we hope from the general to the personal. If you are a mayor or a serious public official, well, they got bored, they're leaving, all right. If you are a serious public official, how do you deal with the complex issues that your city faces or your state faces, and you look at that camera and you say, oh God, I got 30 seconds to do it. And then you understand why politicians become morons. It's not necessarily their fault. You try it sometime. Try to deal about a complex and serious issue and get it into the 24 seconds that you need to get it into onto the tube. It drives you a little bit crazy. You're schizophrenic. You're sitting there and you know it. Very often. This has happened a dozen times. You give everybody up here has been through this. You give a 15-minute speech. You spend 4 hours writing it. You've handed it out. They say, this is crap. Now, what I want to know is, and it could be totally irrelevant to anything, and what's on television or in the newspaper doesn't have anything necessarily to do with what you have said. Now, the point is here not to criticize the local media, who are not by any means. They're better, I suspect, than what exists nationally, but it's to point out the trends, the understanding of the impossibility to deal seriously with issues, complex issues, in 30 seconds. And then what you got is evolutions occur from that. You have politicians who then think in 30-second tidbits, which leads you to Ronald Reagan. Okay? And photo opportunities. What is that? Oh, the helicopter's whirling. And that's okay. That works well. And you get out, as Abby was saying, the deep and complex issue that we're number one. And America is always right. And that's a trend that we're moving to. And it's getting, I think, worse. I think the idea of writing long stories with long words and with an historical context is kind of boring. And what we want is something a little bit snappier, a little bit more confrontational. And people like me, actually, amazing that I bore the media. I keep talking about the same old things, how the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and they want to know if I'm running for Congress or what am I doing tomorrow. And because the deep issues, the hard issues, are not as exciting as simplistic stuff. Let me touch on just a few other things, and I know you've listened to a lot of talks, so I won't be too long. I got interested in the media a number of years ago, and the first real experience is about 10 years ago, shortly before I was elected mayor. I produced a television program on the life of Eugene V. Debs, a man who I hope most of you know who he was, one of the great men in American history. And it was basically a biographical account of his life, technologically very poor, a very low-budget program, but it defended Debs' life, and it defended socialism. And I took it over to Vermont Educational Television. I don't know if any of you remember this, a long time ago, 10 years ago. And I said to them, this is public television in Vermont. I'm reasonably well known. I've run for office 47 times. I hope that you will put this on the air. Well, we gave it to them, and 1 week went by, and 2 weeks, and 6 weeks. And several months later, the guy called up, and he said, no, we can't put this program on the air because it's biased. It doesn't give two sides to the story. And as you know, in America, we always you get the capitalist side and the socialist side on all of the programs. And that only gave the socialist side. To make a long story short, we didn't give up. In the true Vermont tradition, we stood up, we fought back. We got the program on not only once, but twice. We got the head of the station fired. They had a revolution, and while the station is not great today, it's a lot better than it was then. The lies that go on in the media, and I think the lies are greater the further away you get from home, because I think one of the points that one of the previous speakers makes is there's a limit to how much you could lie when people live a reality in a community. But the lies get very, very bad when you deal with issues like Nicaragua. And it never stops. And I have to say, Peter Frayne mentioned that Nora Astorga, who was here last year, died, and a very, very beautiful woman. And I have my own feelings about what causes cancer and the psychosomatic aspects of cancer. And she was 39 years old, a very vital and beautiful woman. And you sometimes think a lot of people are dying in Nicaragua. And without trying to psychologicalize, one wonders if the war did not claim another victim of a person who couldn't deal with that tremendous grief and suffering that's going on in her own country. And you see over and over again when you watch the television, for example, it goes without saying, we had to deal with Channel 3 on this issue a year ago, when the commentator was there was saying, the communist leader of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega. Let me break the news to you. You haven't heard it on television. Daniel Ortega happens not to be a communist. You may like that, you may not like it. That happens to be a fact. The guy who's head of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev, is a communist. All right? There are people who call themselves communists. That's fine. Ortega happens not to be. So every time you hear television, the Marxist-Leninist leader of Nicaragua, it happens to be a lie. He's the president of the country. Among other things, he's democratically elected. Among other things, he happens not to be a communist, but that's all you hear. Immediately, a communist. Why is he a communist? Because Ronald Reagan has said that he's a communist. And if you say the word communist over and over again, then you create the truth. You repeat it over and over again. And it is not essentially different than what goes on in the Soviet Union. There, the party makes the line and the media copies it to a very significant degree. Here, the government creates the line and the lie continues. It's repeated over and over again. When you talk about things like Nicaragua, and I only use Nicaragua as an example, I can give you a dozen different examples. How often in the discussion of what's going on, the war against the people of Nicaragua, is it even putting the historical context of the fact that every single time, without exception, that there has been a revolution in Central or Latin America where the people have stood up for injustice, without exception, the United States government has either successfully or unsuccessfully attempted to overthrow that government. Whether it's Allende's Chile, whether it's Grenada, the Dominican Republic, Brazil, the attempt to overthrow the government of Cuba, that's the rule. Now, how often do you hear Don Brokaw, whatever his name is, Tom Brokaw, saying the United States today, in a consistent policy of overthrowing every revolution that has ever attempted in Latin and Central America today, announced that it was going to war against the people of Nicaragua. It's a new thing. It hasn't happened again. This time, it just so happens we're going to war against the terrible people in Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, funny thing, and Abby mentioned the word La Prensa, and suddenly Ronald Reagan can't sleep at night because he's worried about freedom of the press. Oh, man, this man stays up night worried about democracy and freedom of the press. Stop for a moment and think about killing the people of Nicaragua because they're not free enough. Do you remember what happened? How many of you remember what happened in the American Civil War and Abraham Lincoln's feeling about how you had to fight that war? And how much tolerance there was in this country during that war for people who were not sympathetic to the Union cause. In World War I, some of you may recall, that war that no one, we studied it in school, we still haven't figured out what we were fighting for. Okay? That war, which is fought 3,000 miles away from here, okay? How many of you know that the Socialist Party at that time, and the leaders of the Socialist Party, who stood up and fought against imperialism at that time, were thrown in jail by the hundreds. The entire party was destroyed. The media palmers raids. There was no freedom of the press during that war. Eugene Debs went to jail because he stood out and he opposed the war. That was a war being fought 3,000 miles away. Woodrow Wilson didn't allow people to stand up and say, forget that they were sympathetic to the other side, but just opposing Americans' entry into the war. In World War II, some of you may remember what happened to Japanese American people on the West Coast, who did nothing except that they were Japanese Americans. Do you think that Franklin Delano Roosevelt would have allowed a press to be speaking in supporting of Nazism and how to kill American young people? I talked to the guy when I was in Nicaragua, who was the editor of La Prensa. His name is Jaime Chamorro, very bright man, and in a sense a courageous man. And I asked him, do you sympathize with the Contras? And he said, yeah, I do. So you have a situation, and it's a complex situation. The point is that in American history, the opposition press talking about how you could kill your own people and overthrow your own government was never allowed to exist. But suddenly in Nicaragua, a country being faced with war by the most powerful nation on earth, suddenly they are terrible people because they're not allowing the media there to explain to the people how their own people can be killed. But that's a reality that you, again, don't see in the American media. I think the concern that I have, and I'll conclude in a moment, is when you talk about what is the news. What is the news? The news today, as I was driving around today, is some American soldier, unfortunately, got kidnapped in the Middle East, and that's bad, and I'm sure it'll be on television all over tonight. But there's another news story. Today, as we speak, millions of people are starving to death in this earth. That's true. They're starving to death. That's news. But it's boring news. We talked about Ethiopia. Remember that? We talked about Ethiopia a few years ago, and we got kind of bored about seeing all those starving children. What's going on today? The question of who decides what's important and what's not important is really the most important issue. And the media does not have a habit of focusing on what's important. Another big story. Some of you may have seen in the Free Press today that I think it was Champlain Valley Union High School. They had a vote, $5 million bond issue. Headline should be, 99% of the people say no. 1% of the people came out to vote. 99% of the people stayed home on a vote of over $5 million. Half the people in America don't vote. In town meeting in Vermont, despite all the media myth, most people have given up on the political process. Headline, American people give up, say we don't trust any politician. I doubt it. I doubt it. Story today. Jesse Jackson running one of the most courageous presidential campaigns in American history. You're not going to see it. Outspent 10-1 in New Hampshire. A black man going to an all-white state, talking about a message of bringing working people together and environmentalists together, attempting to build a movement that this country desperately needs. It is a story of tremendous heroism, of huge numbers of people trying to do something extraordinary with no money, taking on the whole world. It's a story that they'll write about 50 years from today. Today it's hard to see Jesse on the news. And you got people spending $20 million buying the presidency. I think what I would conclude with is simply this. The media itself, and I want to congratulate the Vanguard for hosting this thing tonight, the media itself is as important a political issue as exists. Okay? Candidates running for governor of the state of Vermont should be talking about what is Channel 3 doing? What is Channel 5 doing? Why is it that our own, give you a small, tiny example, why is it that our own local musicians here in the state of Vermont can't get on commercial television? What does it mean that we are bombarded every hour by dozens of the stupid 30-second commercials? What does it do to the minds of our people? Why isn't the medical school, my friends at the medical school up there, and the psychiatrists, and I say this very seriously, doing studies, and you talk to teachers, talk to educators, and they will tell you what commercials and television are doing to the kids. Where are the studies of what television is doing to the kids? And Abby Hoffman is right. Television is the major drug problem in America today. Is it going to be talked about? And where are the stories talking about what money and greed and vulgarity do to us? Money up in the medical center, making more and more money out of people's sickness. Money on television. Television is an extraordinary technology that can educate people, bring this world together. And yet it's been prostituted by commercials, by people who own it, who only want to use it for money. Where is the story about housing? The problem is not that we have 3 million people sleeping out on the street. We don't have a housing crisis. If you got $200,000 to buy a condominium, why aren't they building decent housing? Who is looking at the people who own and control this country? How does an Angelo Pizzigalli become the president of the Board of Trustees of the University of Vermont? What does that mean? That's the major intellectual center of the state of Vermont, in which a guy is a millionaire whose claim to fame was he broke the construction unions in our state. Is that the person? Is that the mentality? What does that tell you about that major intellectual center up there? And where is the media? Good. Ultimately is not an accident. The media is their media. They own it. It's theirs, and we shouldn't complain. In fact, the God's honest truth is, the day after I was elected mayor, I said to some of my colleagues, we can't survive, we're going to have to develop our own media. Well, that wasn't quite true. We were able to survive. But the fact that we have not developed a progressive media, a real progressive media in the state of Vermont, is a real problem. There's nothing to complain about. You can't go to the owners of Gannett and say, you're not giving us a fair shake. That's being silly and that's being a crybaby. In fact, they do reasonably well. It could be a lot worse. That's really true. Okay? Ultimately, you're going to have a real media in this country when we have a political movement in this real country. And when that movement comes together of workers and environmentalists and women, and we're going to put in our money and create our own media. And here's an important point, too, for those of you who are progressives. Ask yourselves why the Pat Robinsons of the world and the Tammy Bakers of the world are able to own their TV stations. We don't own ours. How come the unions, with their money, us, with our coming together, don't own our own media? Why aren't we thinking in that direction? Why aren't we putting pressure on the local media to demand that it be a lot better than it is? The fight ultimately is a political fight. They own the world, we don't. We're striving to make it a better place. Let's stand up, let's do it, and let's take on the media. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bernie. Now's the time for you to join us in participating in this program tonight and take some questions or shots at the people who criticize the media or whatever you like. And if you would just come up to this microphone here, right in the center. Here comes the media right now. Chittenden Community Television.
I'm really worked up.
Put the mic down so we can hear you.
Can you hear me? I don't think it is plugged in. And I'm really worked up because I've just about had it listening to people criticizing the mainstream media and not offering a solution. And I'm also really worked up because we at CCTV have struggled for about 3 years to provide alternative pictures of what happens, just like the Vanguard has struggled for 10 years to provide alternative pictures of what happens. And we continue to exist in a climate that does not support alternative pictures. And they don't support alternative pictures because, as the speakers outlined, there's no money in it. And until people in the left, or progressives, or alternative thinkers, or people who simply have had it with what's offered on mainstream television, until they incorporate the alternative media and what's available into their organizing and into their everyday, it's not going to happen. Until people come to CCTV and say, we know you have voluminous tapes on housing organizing, how can we use them in our efforts? There isn't any point for us to continue what we're doing. And we are at the point, and I think all alternative media reaches the point, where they say, the point is not that we're doing it. The real ultimate value is in people using what's happening. And I encourage all of you, as organizers and as activists and as people who challenge the status quo, and as people who are not content with the fact that the media is controlled by people with money, to use the alternative outlets available to them, to write letters, to call the media to accountability, to use public access, to use projects like Deep Dish, which is the first time that people have had access to satellite airtime, which is going to start up again in April on Channel 15. And I really strongly, I just have to make this statement because I couldn't feel it much more strongly, and the alternative media will not flourish or survive unless we have the support of everyone. And I say that for the Vanguard. I may be bold to speak for them, but I also say it for organizations like CCTV. And we're having a workshop on Monday and Tuesday called Take Advantage of the Media, which is how you can use the media as alternative organizers between 12 and 2 at the Congregational Church on Monday, the College Street Congregational Church. Thank you.
That was Lauren Glenn Davidian of CCTV, and in fact CCTV does a great deal in this community to contribute to the video media, from covering events such as the Burlington Board of Aldermen, which one day will be on live, depending on what the next owner of the cable company decides he wants to do, probably, and the school board meetings, and we see Bernie on public access TV as well, and all those crazy prayer meetings too, which seem to be on more than anything else. Bernie?
I do apologize to Lauren and to Nat Air, who are back there, who are heroes and heroines of this area. What they have done on Channel 15, when we recently got it, some of you know we have a cable company here called Mountain Cable, and when we negotiated with them their right to come to Burlington, we insisted on a strong public access station, which is Channel 15. During that debate, there were people who were telling us that people are not interested in public access, it won't work, etc., etc. We have made considerable progress, okay? For example, if you want to know what's going on in the city of Burlington, probably the most important media would be Channel 15. They televise at length Board of Aldermen's meetings, school board meetings, department meetings, and we want to expand that. We, for example, have a grant, some of you may have seen a while back, films produced in Nicaragua that appear on Nicaraguan television on Channel 15. We had films from Cuba on Channel 15. We are now out with a grant which will allow us to show on a regular basis, if we get the grant, some of the best alternative films in America right on Channel 15. I think we've got to do more work. We've tried. I think we've made some significant gains. We've come away in the last year. We've made some progress. We have a long way to go, and I would just echo Lauren's concern that Channel 15 has the real potential to be a significant force in this community, and we need more people to get involved in it.